What makes a home? Is it the walls that surround you, or the people you share your heart with? For Alara, huddled at a rain-slicked bus stop with her 5-year-old son, Noah, the question was a luxury she couldn't afford. Home was a memory, a ghost of a life that had vanished a year ago. Now, home was wherever she could keep Noah warm, wherever she could find their next meal. She pulled the thin collar of her worn coat tighter, a futile gesture against the biting November wind. Noah shivered beside her, his small face buried in her side. A sleek black car, the kind that seemed to absorb the city's gray light, purred to a stop beside them. The back window glided down, revealing a man whose face was a mask of chiseled exhaustion. His suit was impossibly expensive, his eyes hollow. Julian Croft. She recognized him from the business journals she sometimes read at the library. A titan of industry, a widower, a man who had everything and, if the tabloids were to be believed, nothing at all. In the back seat, 2 small shadows were buckled into pristine leather seats. A boy, maybe 7, stared out the window with a blankness that chilled her more than the rain. A girl, a little younger than Noah, clutched a threadbare teddy bear, her expression a perfect mirror of her father's grief. Julian's gaze wasn't on her, not really. It was on the way she instinctively wrapped her arm around Noah, tucking his head under her chin, whispering something that made a tiny smile flicker on his lips. It was an act of effortless, unconditional love. An act Julian had forgotten how to perform. His own children, Leo and Mia, had been silent for months, lost in a fog he couldn't penetrate. He had hired the best nannies, the most qualified child psychologists, the most cheerful housekeepers. They had all failed, defeated by the suffocating quiet of his mausoleum of a mansion. He had been driving aimlessly, fleeing a house that felt more like a tomb, when he saw her. He saw the gentle way she protected her son from the elements, a fierce, quiet strength in her posture. He saw the light in her son's eyes, a light that had been extinguished in his own children's. He didn't know her story, her name, or where she was going. He only knew what he saw, and it was a language his desperate heart understood. He leaned forward, his voice raspy, a plea cutting through the city noise. "Excuse me," he said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy. Alara looked up, her guard instantly raised. She clutched Noah a little tighter. I'm sorry to bother you," Julian stammered, his usual confidence completely gone. He gestured vaguely toward the 2 silent children in his car. "My kids. They need you." The statement was so absurd, so raw, it hung in the air between them. Not "I need a nanny" or "Are you looking for work?" But, "My kids need you." It was a diagnosis, a cry for help. Alara stared at him, then at the children in the car. She saw their profound sadness, a mirror of the ache she carried for her lost husband, the ache she fought every day for Noah's sake. She saw a father drowning, reaching for a lifeline he couldn't even name. The rain began to fall harder, and in that moment, standing on the precipice of an impossible choice, a single wild thought broke through her fear. What if he was right? Alara's first steps inside the Croft mansion felt like entering a different world, one encased in glass. The foyer was vast and silent, the marble floors gleaming under a cathedral ceiling. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine, every object placed with geometric precision. It wasn't a home. It was a gallery, curated by grief. Julian led her through rooms that echoed with their footsteps, the air cold and still. He explained the children's routine in clipped, formal tones, as if reading from a manual. Leo, age 8, hadn't spoken more than a single word at a time since his mother, Amelia, had passed away 2 years ago. Mia, 6, communicated primarily through her worn stuffed bear, a brown creature named Barnaby. The first few days were a study in quiet observation. Alara and Noah were given a suite of rooms in a separate wing, comfortable and luxurious, but just as sterile as the rest of the house. Noah, usually boisterous, was subdued by the oppressive silence. Alara didn't push. She knew that trust, like a garden, couldn't be rushed. It needed patient, gentle tending. She started in the kitchen, a cavernous space of stainless steel and granite that clearly hadn't seen a home-cooked meal in years. She found flour, sugar, and eggs in the walk-in pantry. While Noah sat at the huge island coloring, she began to bake simple sugar cookies. The scent, warm and sweet with vanilla, was the first thing to challenge the house's sterile air. It crept up the grand staircase and curled under doorways. Mia was the first to appear, a tiny scout hovering in the hall. She didn't speak, just watched with wide, curious eyes as Alara and Noah used cookie cutters to make stars and dinosaurs. Alara didn't look at her directly. "Noah, do you think the dinosaur would like some sprinkles?" she asked, her voice soft. Noah giggled, shaking green sprinkles with abandon. Alara slid the tray into the oven and then, as if just noticing the small figure in the doorway, she smiled. "Would you like to help us watch them bake?" Mia hesitated, her grip tightening on Barnaby the bear. Then, she took a slow, deliberate step into the kitchen, her first voluntary entry into a shared space. She didn't speak, but she stood beside Noah, her gaze fixed on the oven door as the cookies puffed up and turned golden. When they were done, Alara placed 3 warm cookies on a plate. One for Noah, one for Mia, and one she solemnly presented to the teddy bear. "For Barnaby," she said. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched Mia's lips. Leo was a greater challenge. He remained in his room, a space filled with expensive toys that were never touched. The only sign of life was a sketchbook on his desk. Alara saw it when she brought in his laundry. It was filled with intricate, dark drawings of tangled forests and shadowed figures. But on one page, tucked in a corner, was a tiny, perfectly rendered rocket ship. The next day, Alara left a new set of colored pencils and a book about constellations on his desk, with no note, no expectation. That evening, as Alara was reading a bedtime story to Noah in their room, she heard a soft scuffing sound. She looked up to see Leo standing in the doorway. He held out a piece of paper. On it was a drawing, this time in vibrant color. It was the rocket ship from his sketchbook, soaring through a field of brilliantly colored stars. He had used the new pencils. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, and then at Noah, who was listening, captivated, to the story. Alara smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful rocket ship, Leo. It looks like it's going somewhere amazing." He didn't respond, but he didn't leave. He lingered in the doorway, listening as she finished the story, another small crack appearing in the wall of silence. A few days later, Mia approached Alara, her face a mask of tragedy. She held up Barnaby. One of the bear's button eyes was hanging by a thread. "He can't see," she whispered, the words barely audible. It was the first full sentence Alara had heard her speak. Alara's heart swelled. "Oh, poor Barnaby. We have to fix him right away." She took the bear with a surgeon's gravity. "This is a very important operation. I'll need a needle and thread," and a very brave assistant, Mia, appointed herself to the role, watching with rapt attention as Alara carefully stitched the eye back into place, securing it with a firm knot. She handed the mended bear back. Mia hugged Barnaby tightly. Then, in a move that stunned Alara, she wrapped her small arms around Alara's legs in a brief, fierce hug. It was over in a second, but the warmth of it lingered, a tiny sunbeam in the cold, grand house. The bonding had begun, not with grand gestures, but with cookies, colored pencils, and a single, repaired button eye. Julian Croft operated on data, on quantifiable results and verifiable truths. Trust was a liability. A currency he had stopped trading in after his wife's death had exposed the transactional nature of so many of his relationships. He saw the changes in his children, the cookie crumbs on Mia's sweater, the new, colorful drawing taped to Leo's door, but his mind, conditioned for suspicion, searched for the angle. He had hired a dozen nannies, all with glowing recommendations, and none had made a dent in the children's grief. Why was this woman, a stranger from a bus stop, succeeding where they had failed? He felt a growing, uncomfortable shame about the impulse, but he couldn't suppress it. He needed a test, an authenticity check. He told himself it was for his children's safety, a final piece of due diligence. One morning, as he was preparing to leave for the office. He walked into the kitchen where Alara was making pancakes with the 3 children. For the first time, Leo was sitting at the table, not just hovering in the doorway. The scene was so startlingly normal, so full of gentle chatter and the sizzle of batter, that Julian almost abandoned his plan. But the cynical, wounded part of him won out. He placed his briefcase on the counter and, as he pretended to search for his keys, he discreetly slid his wallet from his jacket pocket, leaving it half hidden behind a fruit bowl. It was thick with cash and platinum credit cards. "Running late," he announced to the room. "Have a good day." He didn't look at Alara as he left. From his car, he pulled up the security feed for the kitchen on his phone. He hated himself for it. He felt like a spy in his own home. He watched as Alara cleared the breakfast dishes. Noah and Mia were giggling as they tried to help, while Leo quietly drew on a napkin. Alara moved with an unhurried grace. She wiped down the counter, her hand moving directly over the spot where the wallet was. She paused. Julian held his breath. He saw her pick it up. She opened it. His heart sank. He saw her thumb flick through the bills, hundreds of dollars in cash. This was it. The confirmation of his cynicism. He was about to turn off the phone, his disappointment a bitter taste in his mouth, when he saw her close it. She didn't pocket a single bill. She didn't even hesitate. She simply closed the wallet, walked out of the kitchen, and headed toward his home office. A moment later, his phone buzzed with a notification from the camera in that room. She walked in, placed the wallet squarely in the center of his large oak desk, and set a small, folded napkin beside it. Then she left. Julian zoomed in on the image, his hands trembling slightly. He couldn't see the napkin clearly. For the rest of the morning, he was distracted, unable to focus in his meetings. The image of her placing the wallet on his desk replayed in his mind. When he finally returned home that afternoon, he went straight to his office. The wallet was exactly where she had left it. He opened it. Every bill, every card was accounted for. Beside it was the folded napkin. He picked it up. It was one of the paper napkins from the kitchen dispenser. On it, in Leo's careful hand, was a drawing of 5 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. 2 big ones and 3 small ones. Below the drawing, in Alara's neat script, was a simple message. "You forgot this. Also, Leo drew our family today." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Our family. She hadn't written your family, or you and the kids. She had included herself and Noah. And she hadn't just returned his wallet. She had returned a piece of his son's heart. The test he had devised to expose her greed had instead exposed his own poverty of spirit. He had been testing her character, but the real test had been of his own. He sank into his leather chair, the napkin trembling in his hand, the simple drawing a more damning judgment on his cynicism than any financial report. The trust he had been so determined to withhold was now being offered to him freely, a gift he knew, with sudden, startling clarity, he had done nothing to deserve. He had set a trap for a grifter and had caught a glimpse of grace instead. The quiet moments after the children were asleep became a fragile sanctuary for Alara and Julian. The cavernous house would settle, and they would find themselves in the kitchen, the only room that now felt truly lived in. It started with polite offers of tea, but soon blossomed into something deeper, a tentative sharing of the burdens they both carried. One evening, Alara was carefully turning the pages of a small, worn notebook with a faded floral cover. It was her recipe book. Julian entered the kitchen to find a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, glittering in the low light. He stopped, not wanting to intrude, but she looked up and gave him a watery smile. "It's silly," she said, her voice thick. "It's just, this was my husband's." She ran a finger over a page stained with what looked like tomato sauce. "Mark wasn't a fancy cook, but he made the best spaghetti bolognese in the world. He wrote the recipe down for me here. He said it was so I could never forget how much he loved me." She confessed the rest of the story in quiet, halting sentences. Mark had been a construction worker, strong and kind and full of life. An accident at a building site had stolen him from her and Noah. The medical bills, followed by the loss of his income, had created a debt that swallowed their savings, then their apartment, and finally their stability. She wasn't just a woman who had fallen on hard times. She was a woman hollowed out by grief, fighting to keep her small world from collapsing entirely for the sake of her son. "I just want Noah to have a safe place to sleep," she whispered. "That's all I want." Her vulnerability was a key, unlocking a door in Julian that had been bolted shut for 2 years. He sat down opposite her at the large kitchen island, the silence stretching between them, no longer empty, but filled with a shared understanding of loss. "My wife, Amelia. She was an artist," he began, the words feeling rusty from disuse. "This house, it was her canvas. She chose every color, every piece of furniture. She said a home should be a story." He looked around at the pristine, perfect rooms. "After she got sick, the story stopped. Now it's just a museum, a memorial to a life that's over." He confessed his own failure, the way he had thrown himself into his work, using it as an anesthetic against the pain. He had provided for his children's every material need but had been emotionally absent, a ghost in his own home. "Their silence," he admitted, his voice cracking. "It's my silence. I gave it to them. I didn't know how to talk about her, so we just stopped talking altogether." In that shared confession, the dynamic between them shifted. He was no longer just her employer, and she was no longer just the nanny. They were two survivors, adrift on the same sea of grief, finding a temporary harbor in a late-night kitchen. He saw the immense resilience behind her quiet demeanor, the fierce love that had kept her and Noah afloat. She saw the profound sorrow hidden beneath his polished, corporate exterior. The open wounds, now exposed to the quiet air of compassion, finally had a chance to begin healing. He looked at the worn recipe book in her hands, a tangible piece of her past, and then at the sterile perfection of his house, a monument to his own. He realized that Alara hadn't just been baking cookies and mending teddy bears. She had been slowly, patiently, writing a new story in his home, one that had room for new stains, new memories, and the messy, beautiful business of living. With Julian's hesitant blessing, a quiet revolution began. The Croft mansion started to exhale. Alara, guided by an instinct for warmth, began to dismantle the museum. Started small. She bought inexpensive frames and, with the children's help, created a gallery of their artwork along the sterile hallway leading to the kitchen. Leo's vibrant rocket ships and Mia's colorful drawings of the 5 of them holding hands replaced the cold, abstract prints that had hung there. The hallway was no longer a passage. It was a celebration. Julian, returning from work one day, stopped short, staring at the wall. He saw the drawing Leo had given him, the one of their family, now framed and holding a place of honor. A complex emotion welled in his chest. Not just gratitude, but a sense of homecoming he hadn't felt in years. He found them all in the backyard, a patch of manicured lawn that had never been used. Alara had bought a few small planter boxes. She was showing the children how to tuck tiny herb seedlings into the soil. Noah was happily covered in dirt, while Mia was gently watering a basil plant. Even Leo was participating, carefully placing markers Alara had made with the herbs' names on them. "So we'll always have fresh herbs for our spaghetti sauce?" Alara explained, catching Julian's eye. It was a subtle nod to her late husband, not as a source of sadness, but as a legacy of love to be shared. The sterile routines of the house gave way to the messy rhythms of family life. Saturday mornings, which Julian used to spend locked in his office, were now reserved for pancake breakfasts. Flour dusted every surface, and the children competed to make the most ridiculously shaped pancakes, with Alara as the laughing judge and Julian as the official taste tester. Friday nights became movie nights. They would all pile onto the enormous sofa in the media room, a room previously used only for shareholder presentations, with bowls of popcorn, tangled under a mountain of blankets. During one such evening, watching a silly animated movie, Mia, who was snuggled between Alara and Julian, fell asleep. Her head came to rest on Julian's shoulder, her breathing soft and even. He froze, his arm hovering awkwardly before he slowly, carefully, wrapped it around her. He looked over at Alara, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. It was the first time he had held his daughter in this unguarded, relaxed way in what felt like a lifetime. Julian found himself leaving work earlier and earlier, the pull of the office weakening against the magnetic pull of home. He started participating, not just observing. He helped Leo assemble a complex model of the solar system, listening with genuine interest as his son, speaking in short but clear phrases, explained the difference between Jupiter and Saturn. He sat with Mia and Barnaby for a formal tea party, sipping imaginary tea from a tiny plastic cup. He and Alara continued their late-night talks, the conversations shifting from the past to the future. They talked about the children's schools, about Noah's love for dinosaurs, about what it means to build a life rather than just endure it. He began to see Alara in a new light. He saw not just her kindness, but her intelligence. Not just her resilience, but her quiet competence. She managed the household with an efficiency that impressed him, but it was an efficiency driven by care, not by duty. She was the heart that had started beating in the chest of his dormant home. One afternoon, he found her in the library, a room dedicated to Amelia's collection of art history books. Alara wasn't cleaning. She was sitting with a heavy tome on her lap, studying a painting by Monet. "Amelia had wonderful taste," she said softly, feeling him approach. "I can see her in these books. She loved color. She would love what the children are doing to the hallway." Instead of feeling a pang of grief, Julian felt a sense of peace. Alara wasn't replacing his late wife. She was honoring her memory by bringing life and color back into the world Amelia had created. The surge of warmth was undeniable. The house was no longer a museum of what was lost, but a home for what was being found. The bubble of their found family was beautiful, warm, and tragically fragile. It was burst by a single, grainy photograph. A society columnist, hungry for a scandal, received an anonymous tip. The resulting article was published online, and it spread like wildfire. The headline was brutal: "Grieving billionaire finds comfort with homeless nanny." The story was a masterclass in malicious insinuation. It juxtaposed a long-lens photo of Alara at the bus stop, looking tired and poor, with a shot of her entering the gates of the Croft estate. It painted Julian as a vulnerable, heartbroken man being taken advantage of, and Alara as a cunning grifter, a gold digger who had orchestrated the perfect rags to riches scheme. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The tabloids descended, their cameras camped outside the estate walls. Drones buzzed overhead, trying to capture a glimpse of the homeless homewrecker. Alara felt like a prisoner. The house that had become her sanctuary, now a gilded cage. Noah was confused, asking why they couldn't go to the park anymore. The children felt the tension, the joyous energy of the house seeping away, replaced by a familiar, chilling anxiety. The pressure on Julian was immense. The board of directors at Croft Industries convened an emergency meeting. Their concern was brand image and shareholder confidence. The story was making him look unstable, erratic. "It's a bad look, Julian," his lead counsel advised. "It suggests poor judgment." The blow that landed hardest, however, came from the philanthropic world. Julian was the primary benefactor of the Amelia Croft Memorial Wing at the city's children's hospital. The chair of the hospital's fundraising committee called him, her voice dripping with polite but firm condemnation. "Julian, some of our key donors are expressing concern. They are worried about the optics. The integrity of the memorial is tied to your family's reputation." The implication was clear. Get rid of the woman, or the funding that honored his late wife's memory would be in jeopardy. Julian was trapped. Every instinct he had honed as a CEO, every lesson he had learned about crisis management, told him to cut his losses. His advisors presented a plan. Provide Alara with a generous severance package, set her up in a comfortable apartment far away, and release a public statement about a mutual and amicable parting of ways. It was clean, strategic, and utterly heartless. He argued, he raged, he defended Alara's character, but the chorus of voices was overwhelming. They were all saying the same thing. He had to choose between this woman and his entire world, his company, his legacy, his wife's memory. The conversation with Alara was the most difficult thing he had ever done. He found her in the kitchen, packing a small box with some of Noah's toys. She already knew. The shame he felt was a physical weight. "Alara," he began, his voice failing him. "I'm so sorry," he tried to explain the pressure from the board, the threat to the hospital wing. He framed it as an act of protection. "They won't leave you alone if you stay here," he said, the words tasting like ash. "This is to protect you and Noah. I'll make sure you have everything you need. An apartment, money. You'll never have to worry again." Alara listened, her face pale but her expression composed. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Her quiet dignity was more cutting than any accusation. "You think money is what I was worried about?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, a devastating indictment of his offer. He was offering to buy her silence, to pay her off for services rendered, reducing the beautiful, fragile thing they had built back into a transaction. She slid her worn recipe book into the box. "The children," she said, her voice finally breaking. "Please, just be there for them." The departure was swift and brutal. Julian watched from his office window as a discreet car took Alara and Noah away. He saw Mia press her face against the living room window, her small hand flat against the glass. He heard a door slam upstairs in Leo's room. The silence that rushed back into the house was no longer peaceful. It was a roar. It was the sound of a heart being ripped out. He had made the logical choice, the strategic choice, the choice to protect his empire. And in doing so, he had single-handedly destroyed his home. The days following Alara's departure were a regression. The warmth and light she had brought into the Croft mansion vanished as if they had never been. The laughter was gone, replaced by the deafening, familiar silence. The children were ghosts once more. Mia refused to let go of Barnaby, whispering into his mended ear, her only confidant. Leo retreated to his room, the door firmly shut, the vibrant drawings disappearing from his sketchbook, replaced by the dark, tangled forests of his earlier grief. Julian was adrift in the cold, sterile perfection of his house, the quiet a constant, screaming reminder of his failure. He had saved his reputation but lost his family. The breaking point came one evening when he went to Leo's room, knocking softly on the closed door. There was no answer. He pushed it open to find his son sitting at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. Beside it lay the drawing he had made on the napkin, the one Alara had saved. The drawing of the 5 stick figures under the sun. Julian's heart clenched. He noticed something new. Underneath the drawing, in the shaky, hesitant handwriting of a child just learning to form letters, Leo had written a single word. HOME. It was the first word Julian had seen his son write in 2 years. It was a label, a plea, a judgment. The simple, 4-letter word shattered Julian's carefully constructed defenses. Optics, shareholder value, donor relations. All of it turned to dust in the face of that one heartbreaking word. He had listened to everyone except the people who mattered most. He had chosen fear over love, strategy over sincerity. He looked at his son, lost in a silent world of his own making, and knew with absolute certainty that he had made the wrong choice. A few nights later was the annual gala for the Children's Hospital. It was the premier philanthropic event of the year, a room filled with the city's most powerful and influential people, the same people whose whispers and judgments had driven Alara away. Julian stood at the podium, a carefully prepared speech about market projections and corporate responsibility resting on the lectern. The applause for his introduction died down. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the glittering diamonds, the self-satisfied smiles. He saw the hospital's fundraising chair in the front row, giving him a small, encouraging nod. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. He pushed the prepared speech aside. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white. "Good evening," he began, his voice quiet but carrying a new, unfamiliar authority that commanded the room's attention. "I had a speech prepared for tonight. It's a good speech. It talks about growth and our 5-year plan for the Amelia Croft Memorial Wing. But I'm not going to read it A murmur went through the crowd. Instead, I want to talk about value. Not shareholder value. Human value, he paused, letting the words sink in. We, in this room, have a tendency to measure a person's worth by their portfolio, by their address, by the company they keep. We judge people by their circumstances, not by their character. We see a person in need, and we see a liability, not an opportunity for grace. His gaze swept the room, unflinching. My wife, Amelia, is honored in this hospital. But Amelia didn't value prestige. She valued truth. She valued kindness. And I have failed her memory by allowing fear and optics to guide my actions. He didn't need to say Alara's name. Everyone knew who he was talking about. I was recently reminded by someone with far more courage than anyone in this room that a home isn't a collection of expensive things. It is a place of safety, of warmth, of love. That same person taught my children how to laugh again. She taught me how to live again. And I repaid that gift by listening to the whispers of fear, by choosing the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. He took a deep breath. So, tonight, I am announcing a change. In addition to my ongoing commitment to this hospital, I am redirecting $20 million of my personal foundation's assets. Effective immediately, we will be funding the creation of a new network of community resource centers. Places that don't just offer a meal or a temporary bed, but offer a hand up. Places that recognize the inherent dignity and value in every single person, regardless of their circumstances. We will begin with the shelter where the bravest person I know recently stayed. We will build a kitchen there in her honor. He looked directly at the stunned fundraising chair. Because true charity isn't about writing a check to protect your reputation. It's about recognizing the humanity in others, especially when it's inconvenient. He stepped back from the podium. The silence in the room absolute, before it was broken by a wave of stunned, uncertain applause. He had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his own life, and for the first time in 2 years he felt free. Alara saw the speech on a news clip someone had posted online. She was sitting on the sofa of the small, clean, and utterly soulless apartment Julian's money had provided. It was safe. It was warm. It was empty. Noah was asleep in the other room, but the silence of the apartment was a poor substitute for the happy, chaotic noise of the Croft mansion. Watching Julian on the small screen of her laptop, she felt a swell of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. He had found his voice. He had chosen his heart. But the ache of their separation remained, a dull, constant pain. It was one thing for him to make a grand public stand. It was another to bridge the private chasm between them. The next afternoon, there was a knock on her door. Her heart leaped, thinking, hoping it might be him. She opened it, and her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Julian. Not at first. Standing on her doorstep were Leo and Mia. Leo was holding up the drawing of the 5 stick figures, now carefully mounted on a piece of cardboard. Mia was clutching Barnaby the bear. Behind them, standing awkwardly by the elevator bank, was Julian. He looked terrified, vulnerable, stripped of all his corporate armor. Leo took a hesitant step forward. He looked from Alara to the drawing, then back to Alara. "We forgot this," he said, his voice clear and steady. The words were a perfect echo of the note Alara had left with Julian's wallet, a deliberate, powerful callback. "It's our home." Mia then stepped forward, holding out the mended bear. "Barnaby missed you," she said solemnly. He said his eye was getting blurry again. Tears streamed down Alara's face as she knelt, pulling both children into a fierce, trembling hug. She buried her face in their hair, breathing in the familiar scent of them. Over their shoulders, she saw Julian finally approach, his own eyes glistening. He stopped a few feet away, giving them their moment, his hands shoved into his pockets as if to keep from reaching for her. When she finally stood up, her hands still resting on the children's shoulders, she met his gaze. "Julian," she whispered. "They're right," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I missed you. We missed you. What I did. It was unforgivable. I was a coward. I listened to everyone but my own heart, and the hearts of my children. I chose the house, the company, the name, and I lost my home. You are our home, Alara. You and Noah. He took a final, shaky step forward, closing the distance between them. I know I have no right to ask, but please, will you come home? Alara looked from his pleading face to the hopeful, anxious faces of the children. She looked at Leo's drawing, a simple, powerful declaration of belonging. This wasn't about a mansion or a billionaire's whim. This was about family, a messy, broken, and beautiful family that had found its way back to each other. Yes, she whispered, the word a release, a promise. Yes, we'll come home. Leo and Mia let out a simultaneous whoop of joy, and for the first time, Julian didn't look like a CEO or a grieving widower. He looked like a man who had just been given a second chance at everything that mattered. The return to the mansion was not a return to the old arrangement. It was a beginning. Alara and Noah were no longer guests or employees. They were family. The unspoken walls between employer and nanny crumbled, leaving only the framework of a shared life. But their purpose extended beyond the boundaries of their own happiness. Julian's public declaration was not just rhetoric. It was a mission, and he wanted Alara to be his partner, not just a beneficiary of his wealth. The first project was the community kitchen he had announced at the gala, to be built at the very shelter Alara and Noah had once called their temporary home. Julian secured the funding and the permits, but he handed the reins of the project to Alara. You know what's needed, he told her, spreading blueprints across the kitchen island. Not what a committee thinks is needed, but what people actually need. You lead this. I'll be your support. Alara threw herself into the project with a passion that energized everyone around her. This wasn't about charity. It was about dignity. She designed a kitchen that was bright, clean, and welcoming. She planned a dining space that felt more like a cozy cafe than a soup line, with small tables to encourage conversation and a corner with books and toys for children. She insisted on a choice model, where people could select their food from several options rather than being handed a uniform plate. It's a small thing, she explained to Julian. But having a choice, even a small one, is a way of reclaiming your power. Julian watched her in awe. He saw her negotiating with contractors, managing budgets, and interviewing potential staff with a quiet confidence and sharp intelligence he had only glimpsed before. He became her right-hand man. He shed his expensive suits for jeans and a tool belt, spending weekends alongside volunteers, nailing drywall and painting walls. He used his business acumen to streamline supply chains, getting better quality food for lower costs. He was no longer Julian Croft, CEO. He was just Julian, the guy helping Alara build her vision. The children were an integral part of the project. Every Saturday, the 5 of them would go to the site. Leo, who had discovered a talent for design, helped Alara plan the layout of a large, colorful mural for the dining room wall. Mia, Noah, and other children from the neighborhood spent hours happily painting the mural's base coats, their laughter echoing in the cavernous space. The mural depicted a large, sprawling tree, its branches filled with different kinds of birds, all singing together. It was Leo's idea. We're all different, he explained quietly to Alara, but we can all be in the same tree. The project bonded them as a family and connected them to the community in a tangible way. They were no longer isolated in their grief or their wealth. They were part of something larger than themselves. People from the shelter began to greet them by name, not with deference, but with the familiarity of coworkers. Alara's past was not something to be hidden or ashamed of. It was the source of her expertise and her compassion. She was a leader, respected and admired. The shared purpose of the kitchen became the bedrock of their new family. They weren't just healing their own wounds. They were building a place where others could begin to heal, too. Months passed. The community kitchen, named the Welcome Table, was a resounding success. It was more than a place to eat. It was a hub of connection, a testament to Alara's vision. The mansion, once a cold museum, was now irrevocably a home, constantly filled with the scent of baking, the sound of children's laughter, and the easy, comfortable silence of 2 people who understood each other. One cool autumn evening, Julian found Alara in the small herb garden they had planted in the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the last of the season's basil and rosemary. She was quietly weeding, her hands dark with rich soil. He stood there for a moment, just watching her, a wave of profound gratitude washing over him. She was the architect of all of this, the joy in his children's eyes, the warmth in his home, the purpose in his life. He walked toward her, not with the grand gesture of a man about to propose, but with the quiet intention of a partner. He wasn't holding a velvet box with a diamond ring. He was holding her old, worn recipe book. He had sent it to a specialist, a master bookbinder who had carefully restored it. The faded floral cover was cleaned and reinforced, the brittle pages stabilized, the broken spine mended. It was still her book with all its history and its stains, but it was now strong enough to last a lifetime. He held it out to her. She took it, her eyes widening as she saw the careful restoration. She ran her fingers over the cover, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Julian, it's beautiful." "I was thinking," he said, his voice soft, his gaze steady and full of a love that was both deep and serene, that it felt a little incomplete. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a ring, but a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. It was a recipe for ridiculously shaped pancakes, written in his own neat, blocky handwriting. At the bottom he had written, "Serves 5. Always." Alara looked from the recipe to his face, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I was thinking," he continued, his voice growing thick with emotion as he took her soil-stained hands in his, "that we could add some new recipes to this book, together. Maybe a recipe for a first anniversary cake, or for a family movie night. We can fill it with new memories, for the rest of our lives." It wasn't a question demanding an answer. It was a quiet proposal, a statement of fact, a promise of shared days, of building a future one simple, loving choice at a time. It was more precious than any diamond. "I would love that," she whispered, tears of joy now flowing freely. He gently wiped them away with his thumb, leaving a faint smudge of dirt on her cheek. They both laughed, a quiet, happy sound that floated on the evening air. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of garden soil and sweet promises, a kiss that sealed their past and opened their future. True wealth isn't what we have in our bank accounts, but who we have in our lives. It's the people who see us, who challenge us, who heal us. It's the people who make a simple room feel like a sanctuary. Who in your life makes you feel at home?